Hi, my name is Chris, and in this video I'm going to talk about live streaming with the Canon EOS R and the Cam Link from Elgato for different purposes. One, of course, being live streaming as well as recording longer content with this camera onto your computer to use in some circumstances. First of all, congratulations on using a way overpriced webcam. Second of all, I totally understand it, because there are plenty of reasons why you might want to do this. This is actually a kind of continuation of a video that I did early 2019, where I first talked about the Cam Link versus the HD60 game capture, I think, from Elgato. And at the time I was using the Sony a7S Mark II for recording as well as the live streaming. The reasons why you may want to do something like this are pretty obvious. You can use something that you already own in terms of a camera that is really high quality, and with an upgrade that is basically the same as a high quality webcam, you can actually just use a even higher quality camera and really nice lenses with your computer for live streaming, as well as using all of this as a webcam, which is a really cool benefit of the Cam Link. But since making the first video about this, I actually switched systems from Sony to Canon. So now I'm going to talk about what you might run into when using the Canon EOS R for this kind of setup. But how are you going to go about this? First, let's talk about a couple of the requirements that the camera has. And this is more agnostic to the Canon EOS R, but the Canon EOS R is, of course, the example that I'm going to give you here. First of all, you want to make sure that you have a camera that actually outputs a clean HDMI signal, which means that there are no menus or any other kind of info screen stuff going on. This is something that most modern cameras actually have. As soon as they have an HDMI port, they also have a clean output. But to make sure, you might want to check out the supported websites or look into the spec sheet of your camera that you're looking at. Luckily, the Canon EOS R has a completely clean output of HDMI, and that's already half the battle. But the second part is that you want to have some way of plugging this cord into your computer. And for that, you can't just plug it into an HDMI port, because those are not bidirectional. So you can't send a signal into an HDMI port on your computer, but you use a capture card in between. Now, it would be really cool if this kind of functionality would work via USB, for example. However, if you don't want to use some kind of screen capture, of course, there's the remote viewing and shooting with the EOS utility. However, that's really not what we are going for. If you know any mirrorless camera that can be used as a webcam just by plugging it into your computer with a normal USB or USB-C cord, please let me know in the comments down below. I would be really interested to learn about that. But with the setup that we're talking about here, you'll actually need a capture card next to your camera, which will convert the HDMI signal into a USB signal for your computer. The capture card that I'm using here is the Elgato Cam Link, which is kind of tiny and really powerful, and it supports up to 4K. The magical part about this capture card is that it actually turns your HDMI signal into a webcam that can be used in many programs like Skype, Hangouts, and other programs that use webcams, or websites, for example, as well. However, you can also use this with the Elgato provided software or OBS for real live streaming, and that makes this little tiny device really, really powerful. This is also the reason why I don't necessarily recommend the Elgato game capture card for the average consumer, because that one actually only works with OBS or the Elgato software, and it does not turn your camera into a standard webcam. Now that we have all the gear ready, we actually have a couple more settings on the camera that we have to take care of. Normally, the camera shuts off after a certain amount of time, but we can take care of that by going into the energy saving settings and changing the camera to never shut off. We want to also change the display settings to the maximum setting, at least that's the one that I like, the 30 minutes. And that is also a little bit of a weird one, because actually the camera screen will turn off after 30 minutes, even though the HDMI output still works perfectly. So you can use this setup for unlimited streaming if you want to. Now, you might want to have a certain mode in your camera set up as a standard shooting mode for live streaming. I, for example, would choose the C1 in the movie shooting modes to be one of those. Setting that up to shoot 24 frames per second, set the aperture, the ISO to whatever you want to have. Either use C-Log or not, but for most live streaming, you probably don't want to use C-Log, because then you would have to grade everything in your OBS studio. But if you want to the recording route, then that may actually make sense. Then of course, save those settings to that custom shooting mode so it's ready whenever you want to do that. Now I mentioned 24 frames per second, and this is precisely important if you want to do 1080p recording or live streaming. And that is actually because this camera, if connected via HDMI to some sort of capture card or monitor, will automatically go into 60 frames per second if you are shooting full HD. In 4K, it's actually going to be in the 23.976 mode. However, in 1080p, it automatically goes into 60 frames per second. And the only way to change this is to actually go into the movie recording settings and choose the 24 frames per second forced mode. And if you change that to that one and you go into the 1080p 24 frames per second, then the output on the HDMI port actually also reflects that and becomes true 24 frames per second, which is really good. And lastly, of course, with the camera, if you want to do something like live streaming for an hour to 3 hours, you need a power source that actually does that. Now, using the batteries, however long they are lasting, is not going to be enough. So you probably need a setup with a dummy battery, and I have made a video about that on the channel already, so you can check out the description for the link for that. Of course, it would be easier if the camera would be powered and usable with USB-C charging. However, as long as that's not the case, the dummy battery is the fastest way to get there. So now we have the gear that we need, we have the camera set up, we have the power supply ready. Now it's about connecting everything together. So first things first, we put the dummy battery into the camera, we plug it all into the wall outlet, then we plug in the HDMI cord into the camera, then we plug that into the Elgato game capture card, then we plug the game capture card into the computer straight away. And I actually recommend some kind of a flexible cord, because if something happens there, the card doesn't necessarily break, or your computer is a little more flexible there. If you are building all of this into a desktop computer and you have that behind your desk, you might get off without using some kind of a flexible component. But one thing you definitely want to make sure is that this actually has a fully powered USB-C or USB-A port, because the data driven through this, because of the 4K or 1080p frames per second and everything, is pretty high. You definitely want to make sure that this has all the power as well as data transfer rates it needs. Now all plugged together, switch on the computer, switch on the camera, and you're ready to go. But this is all plug and play, so you can actually do this while all these devices are already turned on. Now it's most likely that your computer, at least if you're on a Mac, is going to just recognize everything and it starts working. Now if we go into Skype, for example, into the audio and video settings, then you can see that you now have a cam link to choose from. And that setup, you can already use this camera in your next Skype call. And I personally have always gotten really good compliments when I've been using this system, and people are like, what kind of camera are you using? Why is this so sharp and good in depth of field and all those things? So it's really fun to see those reactions instead of having a normal built-in camera in your MacBook or other computer. And if you're doing OBS live streaming, of course, you just open OBS, you create a new scene or use a scene that you already have, you right-click or click the plus icon and you choose the video capture device, and there you choose the cam link. And once you have done that, you just click on the resolution drop-down. You should see the one that you want, and then you also click on the frame rate drop-down. And if you want to use the full HD mode in 24 frames per second, but you only see the 59.95 frames per second, you actually have to go back to the camera, go into the recording quality settings, and there you want to choose the forced 24 frames per second mode. And then on your computer, you want to switch that drop down again, click it again, and it should update and give you the true 24 frames per second. And now you have set up OBS and Skype to use your really good camera as a webcam, and you can wow everybody, and you can live stream or you can record really good screencasts as well. A few things at the end here. I'm not affiliated with Canon or Elgato. I have purchased all of the equipment mentioned in this video myself, and I'm just a user. However, I find these types of videos really helpful, and that's why I wanted to give back to this community and hopefully could give you good information on this topic. If you have any questions about these things, please leave them in the comments down below, and I will try to answer as many of them as possible. If you want to check out the gear that I've talked about, the Elgato Game Capture, the Elgato Cam Link, as well as the Canon EOS R, of course, you can find those links in the description below as well. And the Amazon links are most likely going to be affiliate links, and if you use those and buy something through that links, that really helps out the channel, and I appreciate that a lot. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you want to have a little bit more information about the Canon EOS R or other topics, I have many more on this channel, so check those out. If you liked this video and it was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos like this and other topics as well. Leave your questions in the comment section down below, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next one. Ciao, ciao!